Welcome to 2023. May your code have safe memory, your bugs have fair bounty, your artifacts be signed, your threat models defined. May your clouds and your pods have least privilege in place. But however the year goes, please join us for a new season of shows. Which means this week we chat with Keith Hoodlet from GitHub about DevSecOps essentials and why they're more than just tools and processes. In the news segment, metrics for security product, images for ML attacks, isolation for clouds, Appsec tools, and more. Make a resolution and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Passbolt is a free and open source password manager that allows your team to store, organize, and share passwords securely. Passbolt is privacy first and highly versatile. It can be installed on-prem behind your firewall, used in a secure cloud, or deployed as a cloud-native application. You can check out the source code on GitHub, extend it with the REST API, integrate it with the CLI or SDKs, and even contribute. Get started with Passbolt for free now. Check it out at securityweekly.com/Passbolt. This is episode 224, recorded slightly before, but released on January 2nd, 2023. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
I'm good to be back, even though, as you were just saying, I'm back, a week or two before this is airing. But I had a great time in Europe. Sorry I missed you guys last week, and looking forward to a good show.
Happy to have you here, and looking forward to a good show as well, because we also have Akira Brand. Hey, Akira.
Hi, how are we going, Mike?
Going quite well, starting off a new year and all kinds of new fun and new topics in application security. Let's see if we can find something new that's going on within this world. One other thing that is new going on in this world is you can find us on Mastodon. Go look for Appsec Weekly at infosec.exchange. And we have Keith Hoodlet, who is a principal security specialist at GitHub. Named as one of the world's 50 influential DevSecOps professionals in 2019, Keith has worked on projects such as starting this very podcast from right at episode 0, because that's a good way to start counting, through 55, as well as restarting the InfoSec Mentors project with Jimmy Vo in 2015. He's also known for his work as an ethical hacker and 2018 MVP on the BugCrowd platform. In his free time, Keith enjoys thinking, writing about, and discussing complex problems at the crossroads of software development and information security. He has delivered talks and training globally on the topics of DevSecOps, secure software development, and web application security. Hello, Keith. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, Mike. Thank you so much. Very glad to be here. And also, happy 5-year anniversary. Holy cow. Have you and John and others on the show done a tremendous job just getting this thing off the ground and running beyond what Paul and I were doing. And by the way, our intros were not nearly as good as that intro 5 years ago. So amazing, amazing work. Congratulations to all of you, and super glad to be here.
Well, thank you, Keith. I was going to say, where's your Starbucks? That was, where's my Starbucks was the title of the very first episode. And you were talking about some bugs and some security, I think, in Google, Intel, Mozilla. Wonder if anything has changed now, 5 years later, and possibly what essential things should we be thinking about 5 years later from the beginning of this very podcast?
You know, 5 years later, I feel like nothing has changed and everything has changed. It's one of those situations where, like, for example, software asset management is just another form of asset management. It hasn't changed in the last 5 years, except I think that more people are doing it now. Ish, right? You see it in pockets. I mean, admittedly, full disclosure, as you said, I work at GitHub. We make a version control system that people use. But I starting to, I just in general from talking to friends and others in the industry, I am seeing a move toward this centralization model. I think that, and, John, I'm sure you could probably speak to this as well as yourself, Akira. When we look at this sort of model of security, it goes through centralization and then decentralization and back to centralization. Mm-hmm. I feel like 5 years ago, we were sort of in this decentralized world. And now we're very much in more of a centralized model. Maybe it's the state of the economy. Maybe it's the state of security becoming more integrated into the DevOps process. technology being available today and more widely utilized. I'd love to get your folks' thoughts, but that's sort of the thing that I'm seeing and experiencing on a regular basis.
So I'm going to ask a question back to you based off that. And I'll agree that most things compute-wise are usually cyclical, right? That 5-year cycle. We've seen it with laptops, mainframes, PCs, like all these different types of things. We've sort of gone in and out. It feels to me like where we are with security right now with all the supply chain stuff going on, not so much the supply chain stuff, but the additive collaboration concept of using all these different libraries from different places, as well as cloud compute. Would it be possible to decentralize that again? It feels like we've sort of committed to this, at least for me.
I think that in some respects you are seeing it. I mean, people running their own Kubernetes clusters generally seems like a bad idea from everything that I'm hearing from folks. And so it's like you sort of have to go to the platforms to aggregate and do these things. But I mean, for example, right, if I look at just what we're doing with GitHub with Actions versus what you see with traditional like Jenkins-based pipelines, as an example, the analogy I often give there is the containerization and actions runner model is to CI/CD in the traditional sense of Jenkins, Travis CI, and what have you, as containers are to virtual machines. And in some respects, that makes it easier to decentralize because you can host your own runner if you wanted to, like whether it's your laptop or some cloud hosted system that you're renting, or you could just use GitHubs, right? Like, I mean, that's what we have it for. But that being said, I think that there are some platforms where flexibility makes a lot of sense and it's sort of encouraged and allowed for to be able to dynamically scale up and down as you need to. But I think the management plane, like the overarching platformization is more of a trend that I see. Like you only really have arguably 3 major cloud-based platforms. There's Microsoft Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud, right? That's sort of it. Now, I'm sure Rackspace would be like, yeah, but we play in that space. And maybe DigitalOcean would be like, yeah, us too, and Heroku and what have you, right? But I feel like, unless the companies are running their own data centers, like, and most companies still are in some respects, even then there's still this move toward, massive scale cloud platformization and moving away from owning hardware and owning that ecosystem because of all of the maintenance required.
And that's a part that I see too. I think of it a bit more, less of the terminology of centralized, decentralized, and more of just what's being abstracted, perhaps. Because I like that abstraction layer of, I just really want to deploy some software to prod. I don't care how it happens, other than perhaps it does so securely, and I can maybe even have some nice things like SigStore signing of artifacts or benefits like that. But another aspect of that abstraction is that I can also hopefully, fingers crossed, reason about it differently in the sense of infrastructure as code, CI/CD pipeline as code, which I've just made up. So that's a new Gartner category, hopefully, for this year. But I think part of why I'm looking at abstraction is that also is an investment decision. Do we want to run our own CI/CD pipeline? Do we want to? How much of that do we want to manage? And I think that touches on a lot of the themes that you've been writing about on your blog, Keith, in the sense of where should we be investing? And when I say we, I think we're talking about, you say DevSecOps, so application security side as well as the developer side. So tell us a bit more about where your mind has been going in that investment strategy, especially as perhaps budgets are tightening this year.
Yeah. I think my biggest thinking around this has always been, what is the Pareto principle type investments that you can make as a security organization to get the most value out of the things that you're investing in? And part of that is a challenge on what can you actually budget for? Like, budgeting for IAST or RASP is harder than budgeting for a web application firewall. Like, let's just face it, security organizations are sort of have that as a line on the budget, and it's more easy to justify to non-security professionals to make that case. Whereas when you think of when and where are you investing is sort of the piece that I often start with. It's the everything you control before your application is in production and everything that you don't necessarily control for after your application is in production. And the way that I look at that is, first of all, centralizing your software asset management in some capacity allows for visibility. In the series that I wrote on DevSecOps Essentials on my blog, the software asset management post discloses a very interesting experience that I had when I was at Thermo Fisher. I was visiting one of our offices in Vantaa, Finland. and software engineering team working on device connectivity for a benchtop device that would separate out like liquid samples into various components. Well, okay, how are they connecting that to the cloud environment? Interesting concept security wise. But then I was like, how are you managing your software? And they point to a desk over in the corner. And there's just like a server running on it. Walk across the hall to a team in the same division, like working on a different device, same sort of conceptual benchtop type device, connecting to the same cloud platform. And I asked them, what are you using for a version control system? And they point to another server underneath the desk somewhere. And they're like, independently running these things. And I say, are you talking to the team across the hall? And they're like, no, we don't talk to them. And like, that's the way that you ultimately pay for a lot of these things is as a company, you say, okay, wow. When I went through like more broadly looking at these things, there was like 7 to 9 different versions of device connectivity software across the company in different version control systems. First of all, as a security professional, how am I going to secure all of those things just from like how they're connecting to this important data analytics platform? And secondly, how am I going to deliver security tools to all of them in this disparate environment? Like, can't secure what I don't know about. And ultimately, if I can get them into a sort of standardized method of doing software development, those valuable resources can be working on other valuable features to further, the advancements of science rather than all working on the same thing. And oh, by the way, from a security perspective, it means I have to secure less software. Like that's a good thing. And so that's, I think, really the ground, like level for a lot of this is if you're at a company and as a security team, your software is all over the place, securing that software is going to be a nightmare, regardless of anything that you invest in from a tools perspective. Just plugging it in everywhere is going to be hard. Once you get that, it's like table stakes, then the world gets interesting because it's now a matter of what can you plug into these platforms? What can you start to offer teams? You mentioned infrastructure as code, right? Well, if you have all of your infrastructure as code in a single sort of standardized, internally sourced version control system, a lot easier to secure. But if you don't, well, then people are probably running scripts with secrets embedded into them all over the place, and who knows what's leaking where. So I'll pause there because I'm sure, Akira and John have, they're smirking, so they probably have some comments here.
Keith, I just want to know what your process of consolidation looked like to get all of these disparate pieces of code and software just together. That would be fascinating to learn a little bit about.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I went and sort of did a roadshow, and I'm actually planning to do more writing on this concept of building something like a security champions program. But what I found was, first of all, branding is super important. We had a woman that I worked with, her name was Tess McCarthy-Bogle, and like hats off to her because seriously, the work she did to build our communication and our branding of, the security organization inside of the company allowed for us to be seen as like the cool kids when we walked into the room as opposed to like, the voice of no. And so that was a good first step. But then beyond that, one of the things that I went and I looked for immediately was what were teams or business groups paying for, both in terms of like their own version control systems that they were paying for, because we as a security team were going to be paying for this, at least as an onboarding mechanism. And then secondly, what were they resourcing toward that? And we found that there were teams who were resourcing 2 or 3 software engineers part-time as systems administrators for their own hosted platforms. And it was just sort of like that thing's probably not secure from a just like fundamental security of that system that they're running, let alone like security of the code that they're running. And we started by saying, look, we'll foot the bill of getting you into a centralized system. And we went out to a few development teams and we sort of did proof of concepts with them. And we built a groundswell around it, right? At the end of the day, when you have developers who are like, we want to use this thing, it makes it a lot easier from a security perspective to be like, your own people have said the following, and we're offering to pay for it to at least get you on board and get you working together. Now, security is usually a centralized cost to the business. And so everybody gets taxed a little bit for it. So it's like, well, they're really paying for it anyway, but we're paying for it from a budget perspective. And so then they were able to free up that money to go and spend it in other things that they felt were useful to their CI/CD process, to their quality process. And then the resources that they had aligned to supporting that system also were free to do the valuable work that they were paid to do in the first place. So that was the sort of initial starting point. Now, Importantly, I sort of had a bit of serendipitous luck take place for our sort of launch of the platform, because it's public knowledge, but back in early July 2019, there was a false alarm that triggered in a data center that released the fire suppressant system in the data center. Now, one of the things that most people don't know about fire suppressant systems in data centers is they emit halon gas, and it's meant to basically suffocate the fire from spreading. The problem is
humans.
Not good for humans, first of all. Thankfully, no one is hurt in this process, thankfully. But secondly, it releases or emits at a frequency that causes spinning platter disks to like rotate and jump in their tray, which, as you can imagine, it's like a nuclear bomb going off, right? Everything immediately below the halon gas emitter for like a 10-foot diameter was just shredded disks. And then like every 10 feet out or so thereafter, it's like you have a matter of days or weeks until those things are also effectively dead, like through the entire data center. So that being said, I was lucky in the sense that, one, the teams that were going to be moving to my version control system had stuff in that data center. And so like, I just capitalized on that opportunity because we just signed the contract and said, look, like I have this thing, we're ready to go. We've proofed it out. We've automated a lot of the onboarding. What better way to use this than just starting to use it? Because, by the way, your version control systems are in that data center. And it worked. I mean, it worked really well. We onboarded, I think, close to 500 people inside of a week. But part of that as well, to wrap on that, is preparation, right? The team that I had the fortune of being the manager of did a really wonderful job stress testing the edge cases around getting people on board into the system and making sure we had a lot of documentation on how to utilize the system to its maximum capacity. A lot of developers don't writing docs. Security people really don't like writing docs. And guess what? If you write the docs, they will come. And when they do, it's good because then you're ready. So that was maybe the like capitalizing on a crisis situation plus being ready to capitalize on the crisis, because otherwise we would have been working a lot more to get those teams over into the new version control system.
And that's a great example because it's you're solving a direct problem that developers have, not let alone losing the systems, handling their CI/CD platform, but replacing it with something centralized better. So speaking directly to what's their day-to-day work, it sounds like that's also and of course just asset inventory. You know, what do you have out there? It sounds like that's also either the potential opportunity or the opportunity you're able to take advantage of bringing in security visibility into that as well. So rather than securing multiple systems or adding a security tool to them, you could add that in one spot. In your essentials, you do talk about tools that are nice to have rather than tools that you must have. So whether you had the chance and time to deploy that a must-have tool, what was or what would be on your list now that you have a better centralized CI/CD place to put it?
Yeah, I think that, as everyone would expect in application security, the things that I often go to as your things to implement first are always your software composition analysis, your static analysis, and to the extent that you can, your infrastructure as code and your secrets management or your secrets scanning of some capacity. Because now that you have access to all of the things that people are writing down into some file system that's used as version control, like get the things as they're being written as opposed to getting the things after they've been deployed. And part of that is because you still have control at that point. Like you can hopefully maybe at least understand the risk that you're accepting or fix the things that will present risk before they end up presenting it in a way that can cause damage to the company. And so that's usually where I started was, okay, let's just get to some sort of scanning of the things that are now being held here. Before we move up into like a layer of, okay, now that we know the risk that we have, how do we protect against the risk that we now understand? And that's usually where I go.
The tricky thing is I've heard from some managers when I've come at this from either a vendor point of view or just being, sort of in similar shoes, I've actually had pushback from some managers of like, well, if we scan it, that means we then know about the problem. But if I don't scan it, I don't know about it, so I don't have to fix it. There's like that's
legal,
I know it's like nails on chalkboard, but at the same time, how do you deal? How do you how do our listeners sort of encourage people to no, let's at least look.
The response that I usually give in situations like that is, okay, say we don't know about it. And then say we find out that we've had a security event that causes us to learn about it in a way that we did not like. First of all, if we're allowed to get away with this from a regulatory perspective and like a compliance perspective, there's a very thin sort of margin of like ability to do these things in a way that you're not like violating something somewhere. That being said, I often come back to whose team will be taking care of this problem, working nights and weekends and very long days to solve for this if we don't know about this now. And oh, by the way, may I remind you of the, $ last event that happened. I mean, we just passed the Log4j anniversary here not too long ago. Like, again, it was this sort of like, yeah, you remember that? Like, that wasn't fun for anybody. And it interrupted a lot of people's, vacation time, their holidays. We can avoid this by treating security like a feature as opposed to an afterthought. And so sometimes, though, you've got to pick your battles. Like, there are hills that are just not worth dying on. And if you've got somebody that's truly giving you this feedback, if you can, scan it anyway, even if they're not like fixing these things, like fork it internally, scan it anyway, and just report on it to your leadership and let them deal with that. That being said, I think at the end of the day, it's some people you have to work to convince, and some people, like if there's probably more people and more teams to work with than it is worth burning cycles and political goodwill with a team that's just not willing to work with you.
And that's actually that brings a really interesting point, because what will happen is if you go and focus your attention on those other teams and actually bring them up to speed, then the foot draggers are going to be made looking worse just by themselves. So
we actually, I will say, the tools that we were using at the time for static analysis had a really nice feature where it showed the grade of a bit of software against a normalized security posture for that same language in the open source ecosystem. But it used your internal repositories to sort of say, here's the size of your code base and your grade compared to this other code base and team. And from a VP perspective, showing them that dashboard to be like, your flagship software is an F compared to your colleague peers flagship software, which is a C+ or maybe a B. And it's like the competitive nature, the gamification element, I'll tell you what, at like an executive level goes a long way. Like there's a lot to be said for that. And if you can bring that up into, executive leadership meetings of, this is how many applications we've onboarded for this business group, and this is their risk posture versus here's how many we have for this other business group, executives will take notice and say, we'll make sure that happens. And you don't want to play that card. Like you'd rather just build relationships with people, but sometimes you've got to go that route because people just don't want to listen.
Yeah, definitely a fan of that messaging in a constructive way, because peer pressure is definitely tough. And I've done the same thing with a letter grade associated with just the SLAs for how quickly our teams meeting their SLAs for resolving vulns. And are they really behind, or are they nice and ahead? And just adding a little bit of volume so there's context, so there's not like, oh, this team only had one vuln to deal with where this team had 1,000. That's a little bit different. But so just being fair. And I think what this is touching on is a theme, though, of people, communications. And in your blog there, Keith, you've got a nice pyramid. But there's no people in that pyramid. So, as we look to history, we know people did need to be, build pyramids somehow. Where's the talent here? I don't think you've missed it. So fill us in.
Yeah, so there was as I was writing this, I got to the end and I realized the thing that I had missed in the pyramid, and you're right, it's present everywhere, but it's not called out as a section, is exactly this, talent, right? It's the concepts of the people that are working on these things. And it sort of like as an aside, I wrote an entire series on security maturity and talking about the teams, their technologies, and their maturity associated with that, which gets back to the people element. And what I'd say most importantly about the teams that you're building, the teams that you're working with, and the sort of ways in which you can measure their maturity is how they communicate, how they coordinate, and how they collaborate with their peers. And so Talent for me, at least from an application security perspective, I mean, I'll tell you, for the team that I had at Thermo Fisher, there were 2 fresh out of college graduates. There was 1 senior software engineer who had made the transition into security, and then 2 security professionals. One was a reverse engineer, and the other was just sort of the traditional web application security researcher. And it was a nice mix. But the value there that I saw was everyone on the team had the right attitude, the right aptitude to pick up and learn new things, and the right level of engagement to treat the people that they're working with as people, as opposed to like another pain to try and deal with and overcome, right? And that's the thing that I think really speaks to a mature versus an immature security program is if you're communicating and you're coordinating and you're collaborating with these teams, if you understand what measures they're being held to and can find ways to make those measures help them look good, to the point that you made earlier, John and Mike, when you think of like, okay, if we provide grades and we can help these teams get to a state where they're at a better grade and we can help them promote that grading such that they look good, that is it has a nice positive feedback loop associated to it. And so that starts with a team with the right attitude, though.
Yeah, and I like that focus. I'm sure one of my go-to questions is always, how do you measure this? How do you know you're being successful, either investing in the right security tools, or how you're am I starting off at a low maturity, a high maturity? We could say, over 5 years, Keith, how have you matured? And I think we've got a sense already. You're describing interacting with other sides of the business, very much a people skills, a communication skills, a management skills, if you will, type of approach. And you haven't even mentioned the maturity of the tooling and how it's deployed. And I'm wondering I don't think that's bad, to be clear. I'd love to hear some more context about why that came to the front of your mind so quickly, more so than talking about the tools.
Yeah. So when I think of success, I often measure it on, or rather, how I think about various maturities think about success is how I maybe should say that. Immature teams often will measure their success on things like volume of findings, right? Which usually has a negative, I don't know if connotation is the right word, but a negative experience for the development teams that they're working with. Because if all you're looking for is problems, you're probably not helping those teams find reasonable solutions or making them feel good about the things that they have or the things that they're working toward. Whereas when you think of maybe like adolescent maturity teams, they're driving toward a understanding that there is value associated with the relationships that they're building, but they're still often thinking about success in terms of like the volume of maybe tools that they've implemented or the scale at which they've implemented various solutions. There's still a quantitative measure associated to that. But mature teams, I find, tend to look at the impact, right? How many things have we positively shaped within the organization to have a sort of positive outcome of the way in which they're moving the organization, as opposed to the things that they're finding or that quantitative measure. I will say, I also use the term geriatric teams, which I often cite as being sort of coming out of a state where a loss of key talent or key leadership leads to just an absence in the network effect that previously existed. Like a mature team has a very strong connection back to the organization, the people and their processes, right? And has found ways to implement technologies to work within that framework. But when you have a loss of a key leader or a loss of key talent, well, suddenly those connections are severed. And so then you start to lose that feedback loop, and you start to lose that ability to integrate and coordinate with those teams. Now, when it comes to just like the level of skill in the team that you have, though, depending on, again, the leaders that you have, the sort of mix of the team, you can benefit a lot from making sure that you're sort of cross-pollinating talent. I'll pause there.
Yeah, I actually had a question for you there, Keith, which is, you mentioned earlier there was this team that you had, which was like 2 fresh college graduates. You had a senior software engineer that had transitioned into Appsec, and then you had 2 Appsec professionals. How do you negotiate, aside from cross-pollination, maybe you can go into that, what you mean by that, but how do you negotiate pulling up, for example, these very junior level people up to a level that they need to be at, while also not slowing down the more senior level people? I find that that's quite difficult. And a lot of companies are reticent to hire junior talent because of that. So I want to get your take.
Yeah, my philosophy at the time as a leader, and I still hold this philosophy, which is if you have a program that you've built that can take junior talent and make them really solid in short order, it doesn't matter, if they end up moving on to other roles. It doesn't matter who you bring in, as long as you can help them grow and learn, right? Like you'll never hurt for talent, and you'll never hurt for the ability to hire people if you can do that. Part of that is, first of all, I always made them read the DevOps handbook. Like legit, I bought them a copy. I made them read it front to back, and that was the very first thing I did. It was because I was like, okay, you're fresh out of university. You don't necessarily understand how companies actually build software. Like this is the target state. This is what we want to get to. So read this, and begrudgingly at times they did. And I think that helped really expose them to a lot of concepts that suddenly, as they started to see the things that we were trying to implement, they understood how it fit into the organization. And that was just a really fast way to help them level up that sort of exposure to the problems that they would face. And what was nice about that is, as a leader, I think the thing that you need to do is you also need to keep your people challenged and engaged, because that helps them grow. And the moment you stop doing that, is the moment that they're looking for another opportunity, because people need that. They need that in their sort of everyday life. They need that in their career. And so to keep the sort of higher end talent people engaged, one of the things that I gave them a lot more latitude on was thinking about how they wanted to bring value back to the team internally and to the organization externally. I will say a friend and colleague of mine, Shane Newbill, who joined the team, one of the things he was very interested in was picking up the bug bounty program. So he became responsible for the bug bounty program and finding ways to make that better. But the thing that he did internally to go even further with it is he said, let's take the findings from this program and then let's bring back a weekly training session or a bi-weekly training session to developers and the internal team to show them how these things are being exploited. And so it allowed him to be really engaged as a very talented individual, because he was not only learning a new skill set in a new space, but he was then training other people on that. And that's what I think for keeping more senior people engaged, allowing them to find interesting problems, the sort of negotiation you make is find me interesting problems you want to work on and go work on them. But the thing that I ask is take that information, consume it, and bring it back to the team in a way that makes it useful for the team. And if we can, to the developers. That helps the senior people stay engaged, and then the junior people look up to their senpais and they're like, teach me more, give me more information. I want to go and shadow this person and do these things. But by bringing in the development teams and making them feel like they could go and learn these security things, that also got them both to be starstruck and oh my gosh, really? You can actually do that? I never knew that this existed. And as I like to say, it made a lot of software engineers security curious. And that's all I needed from them, because as soon as they were curious about these things, the things that I was trying to ask them to do became easier, because they're like, oh, I saw that on that one training a month ago. And I saw we had a vulnerability in that. And I saw that the tool flagged on that. We should have fixed that. And it's now you can. What's stopping you? And so I think that was the huge benefit within the organization, though, is that element of letting senior people do interesting things and bringing it back to the broader organization and to the internal team. Because two of the more senior software engineer and one of those college hires were both part of the software engineering team at Thermo Fisher, and they participated in that and then came across because they said, oh, hey, I'm interested in this. I'm going to learn more and do more in my free time to be better at this. And then eventually I just said, you're doing really well. I've got roles on my team. Do you just want to come over here and do this over here? And they're like, yeah, let's make this happen. And so it built this culture. And again, it started with branding, right? Tess did a wonderful job making sure we had a cool logo, and we had coins and chamois and all this stuff that we'd give out when you go visit an office. But then we made it a weekly thing or a bi-weekly thing that people could participate in. And it got people engaged, which is awesome.
Yeah, I love that. The story is great for emphasizing what you're talking about earlier, in the sense of measuring success or measuring impact to the business, or showing we actually, as a security team, have a value. And our value doesn't come from driving a number down to zero, the number of findings, because I agree. I think ideally we would like findings to go down to zero, and we're working to, in a way, put ourselves out of a job, call that shift left, or just call that we don't have any vulns and we have memory safe languages, et cetera. But our value doesn't disappear. And I think that was really great. I just wanted to emphasize you're pointing out different ways for developers to come onto the security side, learn more, lean into that aspect, do more training, as well as the security side, to then find a problem and go dig into the engineering side of that problem. And that's how you're explaining perhaps more mature teams. You're providing those examples of what's a good way to be a manager of those teams as well. So I just wanted to highlight what you're doing there too, Keith.
Thanks. And yeah, I mean, as a problem space, let's just say software's eating the world. Like, we're not going anywhere. There's a lot of job security in the space right now. And so taking opportunities to learn and grow in this space is a huge advantage for anyone that wants to pick it up, security professionals or software developers or otherwise.
So you've been obviously writing about that. We've crossed two streams now, both your DevSecOps essentials as well as maturity, two categories on securing.dev. So listeners, go definitely check those out, give them a read. But as you were just mentioning there, Keith, Appsec isn't going anywhere, but what's perhaps one thing you'd like to see happen within Appsec within 2023?
So I thought long and hard about this. The one thing that I'd love to see, especially security professionals, but also software engineers to some extent, do in 2023, read the DevOps handbook front to back. I kid you not. That will bring so much more security and maturity to your organization faster than anything else you could possibly do this year. Give them the book, ask them to read it 20 minutes a day, just during the week.
You know why I snigger is again, me in my little bubble, I just presume people have read that. It's such a short read and it's such an excellent read that it's managers, just buy a copy of this for your team, for your team members. It's totally agree with you.
And it's not a huge investment. It's like $20. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, give us a pitch. How do we sell that in a sentence or two? Because is it telling, it doesn't sound like it's going to cover CVSS, how to calculate CVSS scores. It doesn't tell us, what CVEs are. It doesn't cover the OWASP top 10. I'm getting worried here. How does this benefit security, Keith?
I want to hand to Akira really quick because it looks like she had something to add first, and then I'll answer that question.
Oh yeah, no, it's just a little thing. That was one of the first books that I was instructed to read, and I love it. It's amazing. The idea of swarming was fantastic to me, this lean manufacturing, all the stories about hospitals and whatnot being able to make their ERs more productive. It's a good book. So anyway, shout out to my boss who made me read it. So thanks, Tanya.
So to that point, to the what value does it add? Let me see here for just a moment. Hold on. I brought it out not because I wanted to use it as a prop, but that's additional material, not the right section. So it's right here. So read the whole thing front to back, but the most important part is part 6. Oh no, that's the wrong one too. Sorry, I'm taking up time here. Part 6 is all about integrating security into the DevOps process. And guess what, folks? You can't be doing DevSecOps until you're doing DevOps. And so in order for security to actually get into the DevSecOps space, you got to make sure you're bringing the rest of the development team along, because guess what? Not all of them are doing DevOps either. And so what I find from an investment perspective on this is, if your security team is meant to integrate with your software engineering organization, they should know what DevOps is and how it works, and how it should work ideally. And at the end of the day, that just makes everything that you invest in and all the decisions you make that much more easy to justify to help the development team move faster and be safer in the long run, which covers down on all the things you just covered, CVEs, OWASP 10, everything that you're doing is going to address those specific measures, but you're going to address it in a way that actually has positive impact to the flow state of development in your organization. That being said, from an investment perspective, most managers, as long as their corporate cards aren't frozen in 2023 for, fiscally situations notwithstanding, for a team of 5 people, you're spending maybe $100, probably a little bit less. You can probably afford to expense that as opposed to, I don't know, a bunch of pizza for the team. Just saying, it's worth it.
It totally is worth it. And for me, it also hits that aspect of we as the industry always talk about, oh, what security training do we need for developers? Developers need to learn about security. That's why we have October. We have a whole month of that. Yeah. But we forget, wait, where is the month where application security folks learn about development? And that's, I think, exactly what you just said there. Spend the money on the book, go learn it. Great to see like Akira starting off from that appreciation, and John just assuming, wait, you haven't read that? I think these are great attitudes to have, to be looking for the AppSec side. We can't pretend to say we're going to shift left, but not have any idea what that left-hand side of that equation looks like. But Keith, you started us off to zero. We are almost down to 0 minutes left for this segment. I think it's appropriate that we got to give you the last word here. Any additional parting thoughts, or what else we should be looking forward to in 2023?
More blog posts from me, so you can check it out at securing.dev. And as I always like to say whenever I'm ending one of these segments with you fine folks, remember to git commit and stay classy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Keith. Thanks, Akira. Thanks, John. Thanks, all of our listeners. We're going to take a quick break, but do stay classy because we will return with News of the Week. Thanks, Keith.